In considering whether to authorize or endorse the use of military force, the Council shall always address whatever other considerations it may take into account, at least the following 5 basic criteria of legitimacy, namely, A, the seriousness of the threat, B, the question of proper purpose, C, the question whether the action is the last resort, D, the question whether the means are proportional, and E, the question whether there is a balance of consequences. Let me first say that Kofi Annan, who was not a lawyer, understood better than many lawyers that the rule of law is a precondition for international peace and security. The question I always ask is, who needs reforming the most? The United Nations or its members? The most important requirements in reforming the United Nations Security Council is that the members of the Council must realize their responsibility. What we need at this level in the United Nations is statesmanship, statesmen and stateswomen who understand their responsibility for the present and coming generations, and who understand that we cannot afford engaging in wars of this nature when we must focus on the growing world population, the needs of developing states, climate change, transboundary criminality, and so forth.
How do you persuade the reform of an organisation when the thing you're trying to reform has a vested interest in not reforming? Because it's a great mistake, obviously, as nobody in this panel would do, to think just because the Security Council doesn't function properly and doesn't rise to occasions, or has, as Hans pointed out, one of the permanent members violating the self-determination of another member of the United Nations by the invasion of Ukraine. Just because these things are happening doesn't mean the UN isn't functioning in many, many ways, with tens of thousands of UN employees doing good work on a daily basis across the range of United Nations activities. Getting a proposal for reform which would have a chance of getting through the veto power of the permanent members. And to do that, I think you need something which is not the absolute, not the perfect, something that makes essential progress. And I think they are the best opportunity, the best thing that might prevail on the permanent members is an analogy with a bicameral parliament. But I do like the idea of building up the popular grassroots support for the United Nations across the planet, for making it obligatory to have it in the school studies.
We are seeing the international rule of law being seriously undermined by repeated reference by some world leaders to an undefined so-called international rules-based order. We've seen the illegal invasion of Ukraine and mass atrocities continuing in Gaza, with a seminal ruling of the International Court of Justice to prevent genocide being ignored. As we know from history, impunity invites further violations. The organ of the UN that is responsible for peace and security, the Security Council, is paralysed due to the veto power of the Permanent Five. And there's no doubt that the Security Council is dysfunctional and must be reformed, both in terms of its representativeness and the issue of the veto. Because of the catastrophic global humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons over space and time, every country has a legitimate right to shape nuclear weapons policy. But already 93 states have signed, ratified or acceded to the treaty, and more are soon to join, including very large states like Indonesia and Brazil. So these countries, together with civil society, are showing the leadership that the world needs. They realise that together with the environment crisis, there isn't any bigger or more urgent threat to humanity than that posed by nuclear weapons.
The idea of responsibility to protect is that primary responsibility is of member states to protect populations on its territory from atrocity crimes. Divisions in the Security Council were never this deep since the end of Cold War. We have on most issues that are pressing and relevant division of interest between P5 and simply adequate resolutions to take actions cannot be past. We are facing a paradox. In an interdependent world, UN was never more necessary and global coordination never more needed. In the same time, United Nations was never weaker than today. So what to do? In my view, we should not give up the idea of overall more comprehensive, more radical UN reforms such as some of you proposed. We have to have practical proposals of such reform, knowing that at the moment we cannot achieve it, but perhaps one day stars will align and we will be able to reform Security Council to be more representative of the global realities. It's a strange animal, this building commission. It's a body consisting of representatives of Security Council, of General Assembly, of ECOSOC, of largest troop contributing countries and largest donors of the UN, altogether 31 members of the Commission. And that Commission is supposed to give advices to Security Council as well as to General Assembly when invited, and also liaise with the Social and Economic Council. So it has a bridging role, trying to bring UN acting together.
The veto is not the only obstacle to timely and decisive response by Council members to situations that feature atrocity crimes. But within the diplomatic world, the idea of restricting the use of the veto has somewhat unexpectedly, even though it seems like a big hurdle, continued to survive. Now, 2 decades ago, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan spoke some very powerful words in saying that if the collective conscience of humanity cannot find in the United Nations its greatest tribune, there's a grave danger that it will look elsewhere for peace and for justice. After all, while crises have been relatively frequent in the history of our modern international system, meaningful transformation of institutions has been much less common. Let's hope that vulnerable populations around the world do not continue to pay the price for our collective failure of imagination and resolve.
I do not think that it is only the member states that are responsible for the failures of the UN system, and that everything would be fine if each and every of the member states would follow the principles set out in the UN Charter. Article 27 introduces the veto without, of course, using that ugly word, that ugly name. That's how diplomacy usually works. It will not really speak openly. One just would have to omit this very short phrase in decisions under Chapter 6 and Article 52, paragraph 3. If that would be removed, the Charter would mean that member state of the Security Council is allowed to vote if the state itself is involved. For that reason, I think the only hope for an improvement of the situation, as I see it, lies in the change, in the gradual change of the global power balance.